Welcome back to Orthodox Life with Bishop Nikolai. Father Dimitri is here with us today to talk about the catechumenate, the preparation for someone coming into the church, the process, a little bit of the life of an Orthodox Christian prior to becoming baptized, and then, of course, the life going on after that. So if there's something that you'd like to bring up at this point about that, I'd be open to hearing about the process for teaching a catechumen, someone that's interested, because you're doing that here with our catechumens, and it's an ongoing process, and so it's best for you to talk about that.
Well, we have a cycle of classes that we do throughout the year, and we try to cover just the most essential elements of what orthodoxy is in these classes. And in doing this, the person is able to prepare for a life as an Orthodox Christian. This is the format we use.
I know there are three of you that rotate in the classes.
Yes, we've been doing rotation with teaching, and it's primarily the job of the priest to lead the catechumen up to his baptism, bring him into the church, but it's very helpful for the priest to have people that can share in the responsibility of just teaching, all of these core concepts. So that's what we do.
Yeah, I know the other two men that are helping you with this, and they come from different perspectives, which makes it a little bit nicer, a little broader for the catechumens, I think.
Yes, yeah, it gives more perspective.
Do you have a mandatory time for someone to participate in these classes before they can become a catechumen officially?
I don't have a set time. What I like to see is just enough consistency, generally something like 2 months, about 2 months. It could be a little more, but just I want to be sure that they're consistently coming to the services, just to prove that they really do have this, real desire to become a member of the church. So I don't want to start reading prayers over them to make them officially embark on that journey to become Orthodox until I know that they're very serious.
Yeah, I was looking at the church records here just the last couple of days, and we have about 70 people in the parish who came into Orthodoxy. These are adults. I'm not counting the children that came with some of those families. And of those 70, there are about 10 who left our church. Half went to other Orthodox churches, and half of those just disappeared. Not sure where they went. And then there were about that number that died. So it's kind of nice to see that loss isn't so great. And I know I was talking with a priest not long ago. He said, well, you make someone a catechumen, then you baptize them, and if they're not doing this for a long period of time, and they leave the church, then what? Well, my concern about that always is that the longer they're not part of the church, they can never feel like they really belong. And how do you make that judgment call? There's no way to do that. Little steps like you talk about, coming to the services, participating in the classes, doing some reading on the side.
That's right.
Finding a godparent, having someone that can lead them through that process. All those things are important.
Yeah, it really a big part of what it means to be a catechumen is that you are trying to fit into the family of the church. And so, at a certain point, you've spent enough time being with the other members of the church, and you've learned about the church, and after especially the priest has conveyed to you what it means to live a life of repentance and a life of receiving the sacraments. Once you've learned these things, and the priest can see that, okay, you're striving every day to fulfill what's expected as an Orthodox Christian, then the priest, generally that's the time at which the priest says, then you're ready for baptism. We should baptize you, and so that you can more fully realize the faith through the sacraments.
Yeah. I wasn't smiling at your answer, but Rocky wanted to come in the door.
Yes. Yeah, right.
Let's take some questions.
Is there some advice or some words that you would offer them before they fully commit to that step?
what I would recommend is just having lots of humility. I mean, before taking that step of, receiving prayers from the priest. I mean, the priest, of course, is the one who determines, you're ready to have prayers read over you. But to prepare for that first step, you need to have humility. If you have thoughts about, how you know better than the church, then you're not really ready to become a catechumen. You become a catechumen because you want the church to teach you. You want to receive what the church has to offer. So, that I would say that's the most critical advice, that should be understood by every person coming to the church.
One of the things that I always tell these people coming into the church like that, just recognize you're going to be assaulted.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be assaulted by the demons, and you're going to be assaulted by your family and friends. So you have to be prepared for that. And in some churches, they don't do this catechumenate like we do officially. They wait and do all that at one time. And I've only been doing this recently, and I like it because it really allows that opportunity to set aside the person. And God forbid something happens, that we can take care of that too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, what is a catechumen, and how does that tie into the history of the church?
Well, a catechumen is one preparing to be baptized. In the early church, they were all catechumens because they were coming into the church. And that's why we have that whole process in the Divine Liturgy where it says the doors, in wisdom let us attend, where we lock the doors, actually, the outside doors to the church. Anybody who's not Orthodox was escorted out of the place where they were serving, which was typically in the catacombs, where the dead were buried. And then the doors were locked, so that only those that were inside were Orthodox. And that was to protect them, because they were being persecuted. So from that point on, once you become a catechumen, then you're part of that church. You're on that inside part of the church. And that's why I like making the catechumens official. It just it flows better and nicer, I think, and allows them to participate a little more closely to the church. And we don't chase them out. That was something that, of course, when the church became free and the countries became free, we don't lock people out. We only do that during COVID. Lock the police out.
Yeah.
So how does the process of becoming catechumen start?
Well, it starts when people make their first contact with us here. They usually, typically, either they send a text or an email. It's unusual. I don't think I've ever gotten a phone call from anybody that wanted to come to the church. I think it's either email usually, and they ask all those silly questions like, what should I wear? Can I come? Will I be out of place? And I always invite people just to come and just come in and just feel free. Let your presence, let Christ feel your presence in His church. And I think from that standpoint, people feel more comfortable. We had one man, some years ago, his first trip to our church, first time in an Orthodox church, he got physically sick. He was throwing up, and he had to leave. I mean, he was in that bad a shape. I never had that happen before, and hasn't happened since. But those things can happen. It's nerve-wracking. You're going somewhere different. It's very different than anywhere else. So that's the first step, is coming. We always try to encourage people to come and see first. We don't push anybody to be Orthodox. It's not our place. Come and see. And there are other Orthodox churches here in town too. Some people have been to them before they came here. There are some people who came here the first time and not been anywhere again. There's some who came here and then decided to go look at other churches too. And that's all part of a process sometimes in human beings being distracted. So you just work with those things the best way you can. Right. Do you find any of those questions coming to you after they start coming to the classes, or do people feel by that time more?
Which kind of questions?
The question about being awkward in the church, or do they feel strange? Or
yeah, I mean, sometimes even after becoming a catechumen. But I mean, I think generally, those things generally get taken care of before they take that step of commitment. Because it's a commitment once you receive the prayers by the priest to be a catechumen, you've really committed yourself to, pursuing membership in the church.
Yeah.
So, I think at that point it's just people are comfortable
Mhm.
overall. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now I've become catechumen. Why is it important to go through a preparation process before baptism?
I would say it's really kind of the essential element about being a catechumen is about reorienting yourself from the mindset of in the world, a worldly mindset, to a mindset that is spiritual. That's really what is essential. And so, when we come to the church, we haven't been a member of the church. We're coming from the world, and we need to change the way that we see things. And this isn't something that happens overnight. This is why we have the classes that we have, and this is why there's just that period of time. It's so that you can take in the teachings of the church, so that your mind can be changed, your heart can be filled with zeal because of hearing these things. So, I think the major point is reorientation. This is what that catechism period is for.
Yeah, I'm sometimes a little bit concerned when someone calls and says they'd like their baby baptized, and they don't come to church, but they want to have the baby baptized. And I kind of laugh to myself. I think they should go through a process of learning about the church before their child is baptized.
Right.
But then again, the child is in jeopardy not being baptized.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of one of those things again where they need that education just as much as people coming from the outside. And I see that sometimes with cradle Orthodox. They sometimes feel a superiority because they're cradle Orthodox and could know nothing about the church.
That's right.
But just the fact that, I'm cradle Orthodox, my ancestors were Orthodox, we go back 300 years or 3,000 years or whatever. Can't be 3,000 years, of course. But they're kind of silly.
Yeah.
Because what do they really know? Are they really teaching someone or just being haughty?
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What would be some of the core teachings that you would cover in these classes?
Well, I kind of already mentioned, the core teachings. We talk about who God is, we talk about who man is, what does God want of us. This is a core thing that we have to know. Otherwise, really, we're just confused if we don't know what God wants from us. So, we talk about what is sin, what is repentance, what is it, what are the virtues, what does it mean to show our love to God. And then, there's a lot of practical things to learn, just, what things are in the church. We try to cover these things too, just to make people comfortable with coming to the church and worshiping.
Well, there's that whole litany in the church dealing with catechumens, which includes that part about catechumens leaving. And I remember when I was in seminary that one particular petition, catechumens bow your heads, that, we were all taught that, no, you don't bow your head now. Once you're baptized, you don't do that.
That's right.
And I remember being at a divine liturgy in Oasis during Holy Synod one time. And in those days, the staff who were working at the chancery would attend the liturgies too. And one of the Matushki was there, and she wore these big hats. I mean, they're huge hats. And so when the time came for, you catechumens bow your heads unto the Lord, she's bowing her head way down low. And the bishop next to me said, "Oh, look at that. That's, what's that about?" And the bishop on the other side of me says, "We are all catechumens in the eyes of God. We should all be bowing our heads." And I thought that was a good point.
Yeah.
Because we're all learning. Sure, we get baptized, but we're still in that process of learning.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, even, in our classes, we have people that come that are already baptized, and of course we encourage that, because this is all critical, and they may have never learned these things, if they were baptized as babies, they may not have gone through, church school growing up, or or it's just some places, depending on where they came into the church, it's possible they just didn't. Some of these things were just missed. They're just holes in what they were learning. So it's important to understand that catechism is, there is a particular, something particular for those people preparing for baptism in catechism, but the other aspect of catechism really is just getting on the right track to believing in God and worshiping God properly. And so this is why it's actually relevant for people that are already baptized.
Yeah, that's why it's so important. As we tell people, just practice as if you were Orthodox.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they can't receive the sacraments, of course, but that's the goal, is to be better prepared to put off the old man and take on the new. So it's a more positive way, and nurturing that again. You know, not like holding a carrot out there, because that's the wrong way to look at it. It's a matter of being prepared and ready, and we see that in the presence of those individuals and how they behave. And you know, we've had catechumens here that were 4 or 5 years, just, you know, kept coming, but they'd been through many other churches, and you know, this is another church, and you know, to make that last stand was a hard thing to do. I was thinking, my first parish, I think I only received 2 people in my church who came from another church, and one was Protestant, one was Catholic. The one fellow came to the church because his father, who was Serbian Orthodox, was dying, and his ex-wife called me, and he was in the hospital for some period of time, and I would go every day to the hospital to visit after work, and the son was living there, and they'd been estranged for many years, and the son was a little bit older than I am, and the son was so taken in by that he decided after his father's funeral, that he wanted to be part of the church. So he went through the whole catechism class, and he actually became the president of the parish there, and was actually the godfather for my niece and nephew. So it was kind of interesting. The other lady was married to a Serbian fellow who never went to church, but because they had friends that were part of the church, and she wanted to be part of that, she came from the Roman Church. Yeah. So they come from all different backgrounds. That's right. We just had one recently where the fellow said he'd never been to a church. I mean, that's just astounding. Yeah. You know, 50-some years old, but started looking and came. Glory to God. Yeah.
The instructions that you give to catechumens to prepare spiritually for the baptism and to turn more towards the Orthodox faith and away from the world that we come from.
Well, one of the things I always want them to have is a prayer rule, because you need to learn how to pray, and that's one of the essentials of being part of the church, and that private prayer and giving a prayer rule, and to start following that, to have good practice. The other part is just participating in everything, just, you know, jumping in. I mean, that's it's pretty active here, so people kind of get going, and it's kind of nice to watch. Yeah. I like to recommend to people to just quiet down their life altogether. You know, telling them to, you know, listen to less music. You know, it's usually worldly music. It's good advice for everybody.
Yeah, it's good advice for everybody. Try to, you know, spend less time on screens. You know, it's just to have people put more of their focus on learning about God, because again, this should be our focus in life. This is part of that reorientation. You know? Yeah. And
then once they become baptized, then they can stop coming to the other services and just be here only on Sundays.
Right, just on Sundays, exactly. Yeah. And of course, go back to listening to their music and so forth.
Well, well, of course.
Yeah. You know, you could be a catechumen for as little as a few moments, as we see with in the case of the martyrs. You know, many of the martyrs that converted just at the sight of seeing other martyrs. You know, they saw that they were giving their lives for God, and they converted in their hearts. And there was no period of official period of catechism. You know, they converted in their hearts, and they gave their lives to God. You know, they gave up their life and became martyrs. So it can be as short as this, you know, if the circumstances are such. So it's not, catechism is it's the proper process when you are living a life in the world, in which everybody is, you know, but it's not like it's a technical requirement. It's just that we need to become, we need to have our sights made whole on God, and this is what catechism is for. So.
And we talk about the church being an oasis, but you have to drink more than once from the oasis to be fulfilled, and that's the encouragement of more attendance at the services, not just for the catechumens and the newly baptized, but for the cradle Orthodox. And most of our cradle Orthodox never, grew up with vigils and more holy day services like we have here. And then of course the job situation is complicated too. And then you have the complications sometimes with families, one is Orthodox and one isn't. But that doesn't change either for both spouses being Orthodox, because there are different levels in the faith, and some find the faith as they get older, and the other one's still left behind and just doesn't want to give it that pride up to become Orthodox and to let go.
That's right.
That's a hard part. And then parents make the decision with their children to leave them home. Oh, they didn't want to go to church. My rule always was: you live under my roof, you live by my rules. And that's just, I tell every parent that they need to do that. They make a mistake when they don't do that with your kids.
Yeah, definitely.
Because they come back again when those kids are teenagers and having problems. What do I do? It's what you didn't do.
Right.
It's like a catechumenate for adults, even as they go through life, to learn.
Right.
And I've seen that with some families who've had problems with their children, and through those processes they've become better about attending church, because they recognize that this was really positive and it was a good thing, and it's nice to see that. Especially there was somebody here on Sunday like that.
Yeah.
It was very positive.
How would you recommend navigating between married life and the monastic life when you were still a catechumen?
Well, I don't think that has anything to do with being a catechumen. That has to do with a person where they are in their own lives. Not very many people become monastics. That percentage is very, very low. It's single digit, and I don't know how low, but very, very low. You see that even among the clergy. It's the same thing. I think the frustration with people sometimes is, how do I find a spouse? Do I go to another church to look for a spouse? Do I stay here? What do we do? I can't answer that. I've never had to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would just recommend that the focus stays on learning the faith, more so than worrying too much about a relationship,
Yeah, and we're not a dating service. When that person comes around in your life, you'll know the right person. You'll know the right time. You have to be the right person, though. And you're going to be a better person by putting on Christ and living that life, instead of just being some kind of a facade and pretending that you're something else and thinking that's going to attract someone. It won't attract any good person. Yeah. It'll attract the same kind of person as you are, and that isn't good for either of you. We've got 4 or 5 couples here dating in the parish. I've never had that. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And from young to old, it's amazing. Not real old, but older. One thing is to encourage people to communicate when they're new and to follow up with that. If they came, follow up. We try to introduce them on Sundays. Sometimes they don't always say they're here. And then other people in the parish kind of need to latch on to that too. It's good when you have those people kind of helping people maneuver through, because it's awkward going to a different place. And you're making a decision for a lifetime.
Right.
So, when I tell people, you make a mistake by not using my number. It's there. It's the only number I have. I answer all my calls. I answer all my text messages. It's very important to me, and I know that you do the same thing. And it's important for them to know that they should do that.
Right.
I think they're more likely more likely to contact you generally than me once they find out that he's the bishop.
Mm-hmm.
But I have the same relationship with people in the parish.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have that. I'm still the father here, so that's how it has to be.
Yeah.
And if they have that understanding and they can start feeling that, it helps. But most people don't take advantage of that.
Mm-hmm.
I do have one more. What would a new catechumen coming into the church, if they were looking to bring one of their friends or family members with them, but weren't sure how to approach them on how to get them in the door, what would be the best way to kind of introduce your new catechism to your family and friends, and how to maybe involve them in bringing them in?
Yeah, that's a good one. The best way is to not be pushy. Tell them, I'd like you to come to my church and just come and see, this is the original Christian church. You'll see a liturgy that's almost 2,000 years old. Just to come from a historical perspective. And you'll see what I've been attracted to, and not trying to make you become Orthodox or to be, to push in any way. Most won't do that. And really, really rarely would somebody do that.
Yeah.
But you want to go low key.
Yeah, a lot of people get pushy with their family, because they realize, this is the truth, and but what they're trying to do is they're trying to control people. They're trying to control their family or their friends.
Yes.
And this is just part of the whole letting go of the ego and approaching the faith with humility. This is what's meant.
Yeah, I always tell people, don't tear down somebody else's belief system. That's their choice. When you try to pretend like you know so much, you're going to push them away. You won't draw them here. And it's the same thing even with people we have here in the church who are even cradle Orthodox, and they don't bring their non-Orthodox spouses because that spouse feels like, well, or maybe the other one, the husband or the wife, gives the impression, well, this is my church. It's not your church. Well, it can be their church.
Yeah.
They just don't allow it.
Right.
And that's a mistake, I think. I've seen that so often. It's just it's tragic.
Yeah.
That's about it for this episode. We'll continue with these and with more Q&A. The last two have been a little bit more specific. The first one, introduction, and this one on the catechumens. But I know we have a big list of questions that we got last week already. So we'll start preparing those things, and we'll just leave it open and see where we go. So pieces of this will be put online for people to hear and watch, and hopefully it'll encourage more questions and we can touch more people. That was the whole idea of this, was to be able to touch more people instead of those, that we have just at coffee.